Hello, my friend. This is Clyde. The invitation still stands. Jesus was both a historical figure and the Messiah who walked the dusty roads of Palestine in the early years of the first century on a campaign to bring life to a dying society, a society that was dying under the weight of the tyranny of the Roman Empire, but also a society that was sadly affected by the brutal demonstration of evil against a critical segment of that society, the children. Yes, we are going to talk about the children, our children, for they are people, red-blooded people, through their and they are citizens of the earth as much as we grown-ups are. We are going to talk about the children because back then, Jesus was concerned for the children in that extensive ministry corridor from Jerusalem to Galilee. So should we. So are you ready to take your mind for a moment away from the major issues of today's world that many of us adults are preoccupied with and look at the most vulnerable among us? I'm glad you have chosen to stick with us for the next several minutes while we learn the heart of Jesus as it concerns our children. It is sad that around the time of his birth, Jesus entered into a violent context in which children were victimized. I'm talking about the maniacal King Herod, who wanted to kill the newborn Messiah because he felt threatened by the existence of a baby who was referred to as King of the Jews. An angel was preemptive in visiting Mary and Joseph and warned them of what was afoot, and they should take the child and go undercover in Egypt. Why? Herod the great coward had ordered all boy babies under 2 years old to be killed. But Jesus escaped, and later in life, at age 30, he launched a public ministry. Kids are people, little people, but they have a right to be here. Jesus believed in that. If you go by the Gospel of Matthew, the first person that Jesus brought back from the dead was that 12-year-old daughter of Jairus. I can imagine how special that girl felt to know that she had died, and Jesus, the man from Galilee, came to her house and made her alive again. Then later there was this father who brought his son to Jesus' disciples for healing because an evil spirit had taken over his body. But when the disciples could not accomplish what the man desired, he turned to Jesus. Jesus took the time to heal the kid. The well-being of this boy was of great importance to Jesus. That is to be found in Matthew 17. 2 chapters later, we are hit with the heart of Jesus towards children, and this is what I want us to talk about. Then people brought little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples rebuked them. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." When he had placed his hands on them, he went on from there. Matthew 19, verses 13 to 15. Here was a bunch of parents from the communities around bringing their children to Jesus for him to bless them. There ain't nothing wrong with that. In fact, I wish more parents in today's world would do that, and not just babies, but older kids too. Bring them to church so that church leaders can pray over these children. But look at what happened that day. The overzealous disciples, they thought it was their prerogative to protect Jesus from being bombarded by these little children. Jesus has adult issues to deal with, like teaching parables and healing sick people. But the kids, they're not so important. Says who? Jesus had not authorized that form of concern about him. Jesus said to those disciples, "Don't do it. Please let the children come to me, and without discrimination, just open the way so that they all can come. I will bless them no matter the numbers because they are important too for the kingdom of heaven." Mind you, Jesus loved the idea of parents recognizing that their children are in need of blessings and they would normally go to the priests, but today was different. Jesus was passing through the community, and so these parents were determined to have Jesus pray over their children. And I hope you noticed that this oppressive practice stopped and Jesus gladly continued to speak blessings over all the children who were there. And after the last child was blessed by Jesus, Jesus himself went about his business. More than 2,000 years later, things are looking pretty similar. Many people are not bringing their kids to church so that the leaders of the church may pray over them. And you will agree that that is important. You hear of children committing suicide, and some have become criminals, hijacking cars. Some of them are kidnapped by heartless adults and later trafficked for sex or as slaves. Children are abused in some homes and outside of homes. Some of them are victims of the cruelty of selfish adults. Some kids are introduced to gun violence. Many of the recent mass shootings involve children. Many families do not take their children to church anymore because the parents are so exhausted from working so hard and the children are left up to their own devices. So you see some children involved in crime and prostitution and other antisocial behavior in some places. They are only allowed minimum of education because some of us see children as property. My friends, Jesus is inviting us to be the carriers of his offer. Let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Jesus is making himself available to heal children, to shower them with love without them feeling uncomfortable. Some of us need to establish a godly lifestyle in our homes that children can learn about God and godliness. That day, almost 2,000 years ago, Jesus invited the disciples to let the children come to him so that he could touch them and speak a divine blessing over them. What a way to influence the future of the community if churches invited families to bring their children to church, for the pastors and leaders to pray over our children, and then get to attend children's church, whether these children might not be going to church otherwise. Church leaders are invited to pray over these children and make a big deal of it. Please make it happen where kids can come to church and learn about God and soon be able to invite Jesus into their hearts. Can you imagine that the future is beginning to turn bright as more and more of our children become Christians, and the enthusiasm that emerges from them is absolutely dynamic? Kids are sharing the gospel with their peers already, and they are not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus. They willingly tell their friends about Jesus. But we who are part of a local church, we ought to pray not only for our children, but for children in our community, and continue to explore creative ways of how the church can be a blessing to the children in the local community. My friends, I say to you clearly, the invitation from Jesus for children to come to him still stands.